Amelia's breath caught in her throat as the brush ahead of her rustled ominously. The late afternoon sun, filtering through the dense canopy, cast elongated shadows that danced around her. Instinctively, she stepped back, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for escape. She was about to turn and run when the underbrush parted with a crackling protest, revealing a figure of mythic proportions. There he stood, the legendary Bigfoot, his hulking form emerging from the thicket with a presence so commanding that the very air around him seemed to vibrate. His height dwarfed the tallest ferns, and a thick pelt of fur cloaked him, dark and untamed. Amelia's initial terror threatened to engulf her, urging her to flee from this behemoth that legends whispered of, this master of the deep woods. But then, something shifted within her, a flicker of intrigue that stalled the scream rising in her throat. Rather than the brute she had envisioned, before her stood a creature whose eyes reflected an unexpected depth, a silent intelligence that reached out to her across the void of their separate existences. With each shallow, trembling breath, Amelia's apprehension began to melt away, replaced by a burgeoning curiosity that rooted her to the spot. He was undeniably intimidating, a wild testament to the unfathomable forces of nature, yet there was an allure to his sheer size, a magnetism to his otherworldly aura that pulled at her. The forest held its breath as girl and creature regarded each other, the boundary between fear and fascination growing ever more blurred. Her eyes traveled over him, taking in the nuance of his massive silhouette against the twilight of the woods. The quiet majesty of his stance spoke of strength, yes, but also of a serene dignity that beckoned her spirit of adventure. In that suspended moment, Amelia found herself stepping forward rather than back, drawn in by the enigma of the being who shared this secluded glade with her. The woods seemed to lean in closer, whispering secrets in a language only two such disparate souls could understand, one human, one beast, both captivated by the mystery unfolding between them. Amelia's heart drummed a frenetic rhythm against her ribs as she met the creature's gaze. Bigfoot's eyes, dark pools shimmering with the fading daylight, held hers in an unspoken challenge that whispered of ancient woods and untold stories. The air between them crackled with an electric current, as if the earth itself recognized the gravity of their encounter. He blinked slowly, deliberately, breaking the invisible tether for just a heartbeat before their eyes locked once more. In that silent exchange, something raw and undeniable flickered to life, a primal attraction that transcended species, a mutual recognition of souls that had wandered through the same primordial wilderness, albeit on divergent paths. Emboldened by this unearthly connection, Amelia raised a trembling hand, her fingers hovering mere inches from his coarse fur. The Bigfoot mirrored her, his own massive hand advancing with surprising grace, until the distance between them dissolved into a feather-light touch. The sensation of his thick, matted hair against her palm was nothing like the bristling aggression she might have expected from such a wild entity. Instead, there was a softness there, a gentleness that belied the formidable strength evident in every sinew of his being. His fingertips brushed against her skin, cool and surprisingly delicate despite their size. The contact sent a shiver up Amelia's arm, spreading warmth through her chest. His touch was exploratory but tender, as if he too was learning the language of this extraordinary communion. In the quietude of the forest, where the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures underscored their interaction, Amelia found herself not recoiling, but leaning into the caress of Bigfoot's hands. Her initial fear continued to ebb away, replaced by a profound sense of wonderment at the gentleness residing within this enigmatic guardian of the woods. Amelia's gaze traveled along the contours of Bigfoot's hulking form, the moonlight casting a silver sheen over his fur. Her heart drummed a wild rhythm, each beat urging her to unravel the mystery before her. With hesitant steps, she circled him, her eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of awe. She reached out, her fingertips grazing the dense muscle rippling under the thick pelt. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever felt. It was as if she were touching the very essence of the untamed wilderness. Bigfoot stood motionless, as though granting her silent permission to continue her exploration. As her hands roamed across his chest, feeling the powerful beats of his heart, Amelia's own pulse quickened. There was an undeniable force within him that called to a part of her she hadn't known existed, a primal energy that resonated deep in her bones. She found herself drawn to the heat emanating from his body, her breath hitching as she brushed against the coarse hair at his navel. It was there, in the intimacy of their proximity, that she caught a glimpse of something more profound in his dark eyes, an ember of desire that mirrored the flame now kindling inside her. The recognition of this shared yearning left her reeling, a tangle of exhilaration and apprehension knotting in her stomach. Yet, the trepidation was quickly consumed by the growing fire of arousal that threatened to engulf her entire being. She realized, with a clarity that startled her, that his desires were not just akin to her own, they were one and the same, raw and unbridled. Bigfoot's breaths grew deeper, resonating through the silent forest, syncing with Amelia's own erratic breathing. It was clear that the connection between them had sparked something far more intense than either could have anticipated, unleashing emotions as ancient as the stars overhead. Amelia's fingertips traced the contours of his massive forearms, emboldened by the gentle rumbling sounds that vibrated from his chest. The forbidden nature of their attraction seemed to amplify every sensation, turning the air around them thick with anticipation. As Bigfoot leaned closer, his shadow enveloped her, a thrilling reminder of their size disparity. Amelia felt dwarfed yet strangely empowered, as if each inch of difference between them added to the electrifying charge that crackled in the space they shared. She marveled at the massiveness of his form, the way her hands could only span a fraction of his muscular arm, how standing on her tiptoes barely brought her face level with his chest. The sheer magnitude of his presence was exhilarating, the knowledge that such strength could easily overtake her, juxtaposed with the tender curiosity reflected in his eyes. There was a silent agreement in the way he lowered himself, a hulking figure bending to the earth, bringing their faces level. His large hand hesitantly brushed back a lock of her hair, and she shivered not from fear, but from the startling gentleness of his touch. The contrast sent her heart into a frenzied beat, her body responding with an intensity that matched the wildness of their surroundings. The quiet of the woods seemed to hold its breath as Amelia reached up to touch the side of his face, her hand visibly small against the breadth of his cheek. A low sound emerged from him, a note of longing and acceptance that resonated deep within her core. His skin felt surprisingly soft beneath the rough fur, reminding her that despite the differences, there was a sentient being before her with wants and needs that echoed her own. Their closeness was primal and instinctive, two creatures driven by a force that defied logic or reason. The reality of their encounter, set against the backdrop of towering trees and dappled sunlight, seemed both impossible and yet undeniably real. She sensed the power in his body, a formidable force capable of destruction, yet restrained by the invisible bond that tethered their emotions. He exhaled slowly, a warm gust that carried the scent of pine and earth. Amelia drank it in, feeling the tremor of his breath against her skin, acknowledging the raw desire that surged through them both. It was a dance of shadows and whispers, a convergence of two disparate lives drawn together by a yearning as old as time. As Bigfoot's hand encased hers, gently leading it to rest over his heart, the difference in size became not a barrier, but a catalyst for the thrill coursing through her veins. She knew in that moment, as their pulses synchronized, that there was no turning back from the precipice of their shared hunger, a hunger that promised to consume them whole. Amelia's breath hitched as Bigfoot enveloped her in a wild embrace, his massive arms encircling her with a fervor that spoke volumes of his unrestrained passion. The sheer breadth of his chest against her was like the press of ancient trees, powerful and encompassing. Her arms, by contrast, barely reached around his colossal frame, yet she clung to him, her fingers digging into the coarse fur that cloaked his back, desperate to bridge the expanse of their physical differences. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the rustling leaves and chirping birds falling silent as if to bear witness to the unlikely union. But within the cocoon of Bigfoot's arms, Amelia felt an exhilarating freedom. Here, enshrouded by towering pines and the musky scent of moss, they were untouchable, unbound by societal norms or the piercing eyes of judgment. Her hands roamed over the expanse of Bigfoot's back, tracing sinewy muscles that rippled beneath his fur. Each discovery of his unique physiology, thick tufts of hair giving way to surprisingly soft skin, fueled her curiosity and deepened her arousal. His touch, in return, was reverent, exploring her form with a gentleness that belied his immense strength. He mapped the curve of her waist, the rise of her hips, committing every detail to memory. The underbrush cradled their movements as they sank to the forest floor, a bed of fallen leaves and pine needles cushioning their melding forms. Above them, the canopy swayed, dappling their bodies with patterns of light and shadow as they moved together in a primal rhythm. Their exploration was uninhibited, a dance of touch and sensation that spiraled higher with each passing moment. Bigfoot's hands, large enough to palm her entire head, instead caressed her face with surprising tenderness, framing the connection that blazed in their eyes. As Amelia yielded to the raw desire that knitted their bodies close, the forest transformed into a realm of their own making, a playground where only the rules of nature applied, and where the essence of their beings could intertwine without restraint. In the shelter of the wilderness, their passions ignited, burning bright and fierce, a beacon of wild, untamed love in the heart of the woods. Amelia's breath hitched as Bigfoot's fingertips traced the delicate line of her collarbone, a shudder rippling through her, stirring the air between them with electricity. Each brush of his vast, yet gentle fingers sent waves of sensation spiraling down her spine, awakening every nerve ending in a crescendo of heightened arousal. The world beyond their intimate cocoon in the heart of the forest seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of their mingled breaths and the thrumming pulse of life that flowed from the earth beneath them. In this secluded clearing, time stood still, its passage marked only by the rhythm of their discovery. Bigfoot's touch was an unspoken language, telling tales of wonder and desire as he explored the contours of Amelia's form. A quiver ran through his frame too, echoing her trembles, a silent testament to the mirror of their mutual yearning. The sheer novelty of sensation, the play of softness against strength, cast them adrift in a whirlwind of passion. Amelia, emboldened by the urgency that clawed at her insides, let her hands roam over the expanse of his muscular back, feeling the powerful sinews flex under her touch. His low, rumbling growl vibrated against her skin, a primal sound that spurred her on, driving them both into a fervent delirium. Lost to the world, they were but shadows in the embrace of the wild, their forms a tangle of limbs and whispered caresses amidst the towering trees. Every gasp, every touch, fused them closer, blurring the lines of where she ended and he began. In the sanctity of the verdant thicket, they surrendered to the tempest of emotions, chasing the intoxicating rush that promised to consume them whole. Amelia's breath hitched, her fingers entwined in the coarse fur that adorned Bigfoot's broad chest. The rhythm of their bodies became a wild cadence, an ancient dance as old as the forest around them. Each movement was a stroke of primal energy, each thrust a beat in the drumming of their hearts. They moved together, a single entity fueled by an urgent need that eclipsed thought and language. An electric surge rippled through Amelia, a tidal wave crashing over her senses. She arched into him, her body a conduit for the raw power that surged from Bigfoot's very essence. His guttural moans harmonized with her breathless whimpers, the sound resonating against the trunks of towering pines. The crescendo built, relentless and all-consuming. It clawed its way up from the depths of their beings, a force neither could contain nor wish to. Amelia's vision blurred, the world narrowing down to the immediate and the elemental, the press of Bigfoot's flesh against hers, the heat of his breath mingling with the cool forest air, the shared pulse that raced through their interlocked forms. Then, release. It struck like lightning, a blinding flash of pleasure that seared through every nerve ending. Their cries melded into one piercing declaration of ecstasy, echoing off the trees and soaring into the open sky. Birds took flight, a flurry of wings against the fading light, as if bearing witness to the intensity of their union. As the echoes dwindled, so too did the fervor that had driven them. Amelia lay cradled in the curve of Bigfoot's arm, her chest heaving, trying to catch the breath that seemed to elude her. There was silence, a profound stillness that settled over them like a benediction. Beneath the canopy of green, they found themselves adrift on an ocean of contentment, the waves of fulfillment lapping gently at their exhausted bodies. In the aftermath, the forest breathed with them, its whispers a gentle lullaby for two souls intertwined. They were alone, yet not lonely, separate, yet inseparable, two halves of a whole that had sought and found completion in the most unexpected of places. Amelia's fingers traced the intricate lines of Bigfoot's palm, a map of a life untold in human words. His hand enveloped hers, yet the touch was not possessive, but protective, a silent promise whispered through skin. Languidly, she turned her head to meet his gaze, and something unspoken passed between them, a current of shared truth that needed no language. Their breaths mingled, a soft cadence against the backdrop of rustling leaves. In his eyes, she found a reflection of her own wonder, a mirror of the extraordinary journey that had led to this moment of quiet understanding. They were different, yes, worlds apart in existence, and yet there they lay, united in their isolation, allied by an emotion as old as time itself. Bigfoot's chest rose and fell with a rhythm that spoke of primal strength subdued by tender emotion. Amelia felt the warmth of his fur against her cheek, a wild comfort that defied every story told to warn of creatures like him. She shifted closer, her head finding a rest against the broad expanse of his shoulder. As the moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows upon them, it seemed to Amelia that the forest itself acknowledged their bond. There was no judgment here, no scorn, only the ancient trees standing sentinel over a love that dared to exist outside the confines of man's narrow views. In the cocoon of Bigfoot's embrace, Amelia found a solace deeper than any she had known. Her heart beat in time with his, a harmonious rhythm that pulsed with the life of the woods around them. It was a connection that transcended flesh, one rooted in the essence of being, in the raw and beautiful truth that they were more alike than the world would ever admit. They lay there, two souls cast adrift from society's shores, but anchored firmly to each other in the tranquil harbor they had created amidst the wilderness. And in that serene afterglow, with night drawing its veil around their secluded haven, Amelia knew that regardless of the morrow, this moment was theirs, immutable, perfect, and free.